we want to tell you about another podcast from PRX called Monumental. This podcast explores questions about the past, present, and future of U.S. monuments, uncovering the stories about what and who is important, as well as the stories that have been left out. Join host Ashley Seaford across the country with their team of journalists. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. And shout out to everyone who is watching this on our YouTube page. I think people know that. Do they know that? We have a YouTube page. Occasionally we do these video episodes when there's a special occasion. And I guess a Sunday before the general election counts as a special occasion, right? Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody. Yes. I feel like the entire run up to the election at this point now is a special occasion. I think we
every day.
Yeah, I know.
We did our October surprise episode, and I think every day in October will bring new terrible surprises.
Oh, we shall see. And we have one more October surprise related episode coming up where we're going to look back at 2008 and the financial crisis there and John McCain's reaction to that. But we've decided that on Sundays between now and the election, and then maybe just a little past the election, so that's 4 or 5 episodes, we're going to do this, which is get together on a weekend morning and kind of mostly talk about this year's election. I know we're a history podcast. I know you can get takes about this year's election, lots of other places, but we also know that a lot of our listeners want to hear what we think about the election. Mm-hmm. We have things to say about this year's election. And moreover, one of the goals of this show was to kind of like give people and give ourselves a little historical lens through which to process the moment. And so we will, of course, talk a little bit about some historical stuff that feels like it can break down this week. Aside from the election, how was everyone's week? I mean, we rarely do this, get together and just chat on a Sunday morning.
Rough, man.
Oh, no.
October's rough. Like, I just feel swamped. And you guys know this because I've sent y'all multiple text messages like, wait, are we meeting today? Are we not meeting today? Like, I have so much on my plate, and it's never like this in October. Like February, okay, yeah, Black History Month, I get it. But like October has never been this busy, this
But is it like the start of the school year plus an election year
it's
plus
school year, it's election, it's still we refuse stuff.
Right.
It's like chair stuff for my department. It's like it's bonkers. It's my kids and their activities, and it is a lot. I want October to be over. Like I felt like September was 8 weeks long.
Okay. We're 4 days into October, and you're
I was about to say this is a very bad
sign.
sign.
This is why I'm like, I need help. I need help. I'm understaffed. I am understaffed. Yeah, that's how I feel.
Well, and you can probably hear who's keeping me busy in the background because my little Cooper has a squeaky toy. So shout out to the squeaks in the background. Yeah, I mean, the run up to the election is always a really busy travel time for me. So I am blanketing the country with trips between now and Thanksgiving. So I'm a little travel lagged, but it's also
every time I look on Instagram, you're in a different
I know
corner of the country.
Just came from Chicago. I'm going to Virginia. I've just got
Mississippi a couple weeks ago.
I was in Mississippi and then North Carolina. So just,
you're on the campaign trail.
That's right. I am getting to a lot of swing states, which I'm excited about. I've got North Carolina, Virginia. Ohio isn't really a swing state anymore, but anyway, I'm ending it all with a trip to the Netherlands. So
good.
Like, that's what I'm keeping out hope for.
Cool.
That'll be great.
The weather in New York is kind of beautiful right now, so it's like makes everything a little easier. But I've had a very busy week in a very fun way, which is, I think people know one of the things I also do is I help produce Trevor Noah's podcast, and we are this week. Trevor's in town. All the people who make the show are in town, and we're doing recording 7 episodes in 5 days, and we're just like go, which will be nice.
Insane.
Which will be nice a few weeks from now when we have a bunch of episodes sort of
right
in the tank. But right now it's a little insane. But there's been some really amazing conversations, and it's kind of nice to just hole up and just sort of make a show that I really enjoy making. So, but it's been a lot of kind of had to clear the decks of everything else, including a little bit of don't feel, if I'm being honest, totally tapped into the latest election twists and turns. Though I will also say, maybe we could start here, but I do think there's a couple things we want to talk about with this year's election and this last week. But, certainly in terms of polling and the state of the race. And it does feel like there's this interesting stasis right now. And I think maybe even a little bit of a kind of like concession on the part of everyone. Like, okay, this thing is going to be super duper duper close. There's nothing that can really happen. We just got to get to election day and just see how it plays out. Obviously, people are doing lots of hard work behind the scenes to move the needle even a little bit. But it does feel like everyone has just kind of like come to this realization that, oh, this is going to be a very marginal difference.
Yeah. Well, that's because, I mean, the debates are over. You know, there's not likely going to be any more debates. There's like, I feel like those were sort of the linchpins that I sort of look forward to.
And it's not like the VP debate did anything crazy.
Not at all. And so I almost didn't watch, and then my friends pressured me into like, you have to watch. Like,
it's your civic duty.
I know, right? Like, fine. But yeah, I do feel like it's almost like a holding pattern of just sort of like, we are just trying to land this plane. We don't know where it's going to land. But yeah, that's how I feel. I can't think of another big thing we're waiting on other than the election. There's no interview, I think, that's going to change the game.
Right.
Jim Comey's going to pop up.
Though, of course, we did just come off of October Surprise Week, where we talked about inevitably there's these stories, whether they're like, quote unquote, really big or there's just more media attention. You know, well, Niki, I'm curious your sense of like the stasis, but then also whether you felt like in this past week there were a couple stories that felt like, okay, these rise above to at least worthy of consideration in terms of how they shape the race.
It's definitely a yes and, because there have been, this race has been wild in the sense that there have been all of these historic moments. You have the Trump convictions, you have Biden dropping out, you have the quick coalescence around Harris, and
assassination attempts,
which you forget about, right? Because there's so much else going on. And then you just had the refiling of the case against Donald Trump for January 6th that was in the news this week. And it does very, very little to move the needle. And I think what we're learning from it, I mean, we knew that we were a very closely divided country and that we have been for a long time in terms of the electorate. But that genuinely nothing is moving the needle is kind of fascinating. And I think speaks to some real underlying problems that will be with us even after the election.
Yeah. Though I'm so glad you brought up that Jack Smith letter and, series, that like case that he sort of laid out there that detailed a lot, added, I think, a good amount of more detail into Trump's role on January 6th. And, the savvy political take that I saw, and then also I think the legal take was like, oh, well, this doesn't really add much. This doesn't really change much. And, that's such a classic example to me of like, okay, sure, maybe it's not surprising what was in there, but it should still be shocking. Like anytime you lay out the behavior of Donald Trump in many instances, and especially around January 6th, like it should still cause you to stop and look and be shocked. And you could feel that kind of like savviness of inside the Beltway, just like the way we've just kind of come to accept all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and that it's always filtered through this matters if it changes votes and otherwise it doesn't matter. But that is not the case, right? Like this detailing of extensive criminality is something that I think matters even more, given that it doesn't move votes, because it tells us something about the tolerance for not just wrongdoing, but like the choice that people have made to prefer a candidate over a system of government. That is pretty concerning.
And we've become so accustomed, especially during Trump's presidency, to just sort of like, here's another one of Trump's shenanigans. Like I mean, I can't tell you how many times I thought something would be like, this is it. And people were like, like, or it doesn't move, it doesn't move sentiment at all. Certainly not for his supporters. I don't know how there's still undecided people out there, but I don't know how any of this impacts undecided voters. I mean, like, there are still people that are like, well, what's a toss up for me? I still need more information. I'm like, what more information do you need? But I'd
be very curious. We've done a lot of episodes about the early 70s and this other moment of kind of erosion in faith in government, mostly because government was behaving in a very sort of nefarious way. But, you know, it feels like, and maybe this is just the way that history gets written, but, you know, it certainly feels like in that moment there was a kind of like mounting progressive sort of understanding of how rotten things were. And now we're living in an era where it doesn't feel like there's one through line that's sort of like ratcheting up over time. It's more just like this scatter shot of various little bits and drabs, and you kind of have to tell the story for yourself or you have to see the forest, you know, on your own. Whereas at other eras in American history, I think that like just the kind of, and I think it has all to do with the media environment and so forth, but, you know, just the kind of narrative of like, hey, pay attention to what's really going on here was a little clearer for voters to see, or just Americans to see, not voters, as you were saying, Niki.
Well, it's chaos rather than decline. Exactly. And that's a much harder story to tell. And it makes it much harder to pin people down.
Right. Right. Though I would argue also people feel the decline. Like they may not see it, but I think obviously people, the sort of like erosion of faith and the kind of like, oh, we're not that special is certainly a lot of what voters feel. And I think maybe that relates a little bit to one of the stories I think we should focus in on this week that all of us kind of picked up on, which did happen this week and has some historical kind of angles that we can explore. But, you know, Liz Cheney did, I guess she had endorsed Kamala Harris, said she was going to vote for, so she had like denounced Trump. This is actually an interesting progression, right? She had denounced Trump, then she decided to endorse Harris, and then this week decided to actually campaign for Harris. And then moreover, she said her father was going to, you know, vote for Harris as well. But, you know, Niki, do you feel like the Liz Cheney story was kind of the most interesting development this week in the election?
I think that it is. And people are very divided about this because the Cheneys have not been, on the whole, a great force of progress in the United States.
You think?
And Liz Cheney herself was pretty late to the game when it came to Donald Trump. But she came to the game. And I think that it does matter when you have that cross-party endorsement. It's not for progressives, right? Progressives get really annoyed because they're like, oh, who is this for? It is for the kind of person who's a little less engaged, who looks around and says, hey, there's a Republican and a Democrat who are out on the campaign trail together. Well, maybe that means that Kamala Harris is more of a bridge builder than a divider. And that does actually play into how people understand a candidate, understand a campaign. It's actually a little bit related to the vice presidential debate this week as well, because it, you know, one of the things that both Vance and Walz performed, one of them performed it more than the other, was a kind of neighborliness.
That Midwestern neighborliness.
And I think there's a big chunk of voters for whom they look at that and they're like, they're nice guys. They can get along with one another. Can we get them like on the same page? Because it seems like this is what we want, Democrats and Republicans coming together. And for a lot of progressives and for a lot of conservatives, that is not the thing that they want. But when you're thinking about those more marginal voters and more moderate voters, there's something very appealing about it.
Yeah, I'll agree. I'll say that, like, for progressives, it feels like it's Kamala more moderate than we think she is, you know, like when you start to see sort of those connections across the divide. But I think for people that just want civility, they're so overwhelmed by the toxicity of politics that it feels like a little more hopeful to see, okay, we can have conversations. We do have things in common. There might be opportunities or possibilities here. And I think people are just burnt out. I mean, like, you can only sort of go so hard so long where people just want to see a little bit more of politics that resemble maybe what their parents or grandparents had, you know?
Yeah. Speaking of the parents and grandparents, there are some historical moments of cross-party endorsements worth name-checking, though a lot of these, I think that the nature of them and how different they are than maybe this moment we're in, mostly because Donald Trump is very different from anything else we've seen, you know, I think it's worth exploring. But, like, you know, I mean, obviously Colin Powell endorsed Obama. You know, that was a big moment. And I think 2008 brought out a lot of sort of interesting cross-party and celebrity endorsements, which we'll get into as well. But, even going back to the 20s, Teddy Roosevelt endorsed Al Smith, which kind of signaled a sort of shift in the progressive era between realignment between Republicans and Democrats. A lot of people actually surprisingly kind of switched and endorsed Nixon. And I think a lot of that had to do with in the Vietnam era. I think, especially in the first half of the Vietnam era, I think there was just a lot of like hawkishness that drew people to Nixon.
In which race, Jody?
What's that?
In which race was the switch happening with Nixon? 68 or 72?
68.
Yeah.
68.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then similarly, Jeane Kirkpatrick, who's a lifelong Democrat, endorsed Ronald Reagan in 1984. And I think that's very similar to the Cold War. We've talked about this so many times on the show. The Cold War was just this clarifying, which side are you on kind of moment. And I think a lot of Democrats, hawkish Democrats, kind of rallied behind Reagan in that era as well. That is not why Liz Cheney is coming across and talking about Kamala Harris, right? It is not policy. It is, as you were saying, Niki, Kellie, temperament more than anything.
Yeah.
So this does feel a little different. I will also say the literature on this stuff is pretty much like, this stuff doesn't really matter,
Well, I remember in 2004, like Zell Miller came out. He was a pretty moderate Democrat, and he comes out and he endorses George W. Bush. And boy, do they make a meal of it at the Republican National Convention. And that's kind of the idea. It's kind of like the guy's so great, even Democrats love him, or the guy's so great, even Republicans love him.
And then there's the other way, right? Lieberman, right? That's famously, and so,
but I think that's harder in this election. I don't think you are going to find a lot of Democrats that will come out for Trump. I can't imagine and I mean like a high profile. I don't necessarily mean
there's probably a lot of podcasters. Seriously, like a lot of like bro podcasters who were probably Obama Democrats who have now found Elon Musk, right? Who has probably voted for Obama twice and now he's, pro-Trump. So there's a little bit of that. I don't know if that counts as a cross-party endorsement. I don't even know what parties are anymore.
To be fair. But Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr., those have been kind of held out as the examples. I do think, and we could talk about this a little more toward the end, but I do think that there is a qualitative difference between kind of outliers in the Democratic Party or like local people. There was in Michigan, the mayor of the largest Muslim community in Michigan came out and endorsed Trump. Podcasters have come out and endorsed Trump. But that is qualitatively different from the former presidents and vice presidents or senators and representatives coming out and endorsing Harris.
Except, and this is sort of when I've been thinking about the sort of effect potentially of the Liz Cheney endorsement and other cross-party endorsements we're seeing in this moment around Trump. Those are qualitative. Those are different, obviously, kinds of people crossing lines to endorse Trump or vice versa or Harris. But I think the message that it sends to voters is different from in the past where it's like Colin Powell says, I give my stamp of approval to Barack Obama as able to handle foreign policy in this way. Or people say, I support Ronald Reagan because of our battle in the Cold War against the USSR. This is much more, the endorsements we're seeing now, I think are much more about that kind of like affinity you feel towards a candidate. And I see like an expanding of the permission structure to tell yourself a story about how you could find yourself voting for Trump when maybe you wouldn't have, or finding yourself voting for Harris when maybe we wouldn't have. And Niki, you said something when we did our October surprise show, and we talked about the 2016 election and how, Trump was not doing very well around that Access Hollywood tape. And then, as you put it, as a lot of other people put it, Republicans came home, right? And in those final weeks, the ones who still were on the fence or were leaning just kind of found that path to then go into that booth and say, you know what? For all these reasons, I don't like the cut of this guy's jib, but I'm just going to vote for him either way. And
happens after January 6th, too.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Sure does.
And to me, something like the Cheney endorsement, it just puts another path out there for people to see as possible. Right?
Yeah.
So it's not about the policy. It's not even about the rational argument she's making. It's just people seeing, oh, she walked that path. that path exists. Those synapses in my brain could find it, and maybe as people come home or leave home or whatever the opposite of that metaphor is, they just, the range of possibilities for that final kind of like, where am I going to land, just feels expanded when you see these cross-party endorsements.
I mean, you see it in the Black community a lot because the Black community is overwhelmingly Democratic, has always voted. Well, I won't say always because, the parties have switched and what have you. But the Black community has overwhelmingly voted Democratic. And so I think maybe not necessarily having like one Black person, but showing like trends of Black people leaving the Democratic Party to endorse Trump. Those stats, those numbers do work too, because people will see that and they'll think, okay, well, maybe we have been taken for granted. Maybe we have been, sort of like unseen or unheard. And so this is a way that we can get, attention. And Trump loves being able to court those Black votes. Totally. It seems like more than anything, having the hip hop artists and, the latest slew of hip hop artists that have come out in support of Trump has been like, wow. I don't think it will move the dial per se with Black people. I don't think someone's going to be like, well, Lil Wayne's voting for him. So, but I do think that it does work in terms
of it just puts it in someone's brain. They're going to find that path regardless. It's not a one-to-one. Oh, yes, I agree with everything Lil Wayne thinks. So ergo, but it's more just like, I see the possibilities.
I also think that you sort of threw off earlier, Jody, what even are parties anymore? There is another side of this that I find super interesting, which is Donald Trump has run as an anti-party insurgent candidate since 2016. And in some ways, he uses these as kind of anti-endorsements where he's like, look, the Republican Party that you all hated enough to vote for me is lining up with Harris. And you see that from like dirtbag left podcasters and others who are just like, oh, well, if the Cheneys are on Harris's side, ergo Harris is going to reinvade Iraq or whatever. And that I think is a dynamic that is different from an earlier era where parties had more formal control.
I'm so glad you said that. I was thinking about that exact dynamic this morning of like, when you think about who's undecided and maybe sort of grappling with, can I bring myself, let's say they're a Trump supporter or a Republican, and they're thinking, can I bring myself to vote for Harris? Which is, I think a hard sort of thing to a hard hump to get over for a lot of people. The two paths are, one is like, it's just too much, it's too far over the line, too much chaos. I'm just going to take the safer pick. And the other path is, it's all broken, screw it. Let me just take a chance and pull the lever for Trump. Like, and those are opposite things, but those feel like the two most natural kind of late stage thoughts one would have, like literally walking into the booth. And the Cheney endorsement, funnily enough, works in both directions. You can be like, oh, Cheney, there's a safety here, stability here. I've had enough. It's been too chaotic. Let me vote for Harris. And then the other one is, as you were saying, Niki, it's all corrupt. The whole system.
Going hell in a handbasket.
Yeah. Throw them out, throw the bums out, and this is more evidence of that they're all just the same. Boom, let me vote for Trump. So it's funny how it might cut both ways. Let's turn to celebrity endorsements. We've mentioned them a couple because to me, there's just an interesting dynamic there. I think some of the research on whether they have an effect is actually a little more interesting than some of the political cross-party endorsements. But also to me, it just feels like actually much more salient in this moment where we're talking about parties don't matter as much anymore. Vibes are really important. It feels like to me, if I'm being honest, like a celebrity endorsement might actually just kind of like tap into that kind of thinking a little bit more for voters.
Yeah, especially if it's Taylor Swift.
Well, yeah.
I would say yes, and because there's also, I guess I'm doing improv today. There is also a pretty long history of this as well. Of course, the role of celebrity has changed a lot, and the role of parties has changed a lot. But basically, as soon as there was like a Hollywood star system and celebrities became like a thing in the 1920s, you had celebrity endorsers. It's like Al Jolson, who becomes this enormous celebrity for his blackface performance in The Jazz Singer, which was one of the first talkies. He endorses Calvin Coolidge in 1924, and then he goes on to endorse Herbert Hoover. And this idea that you could have this celebrity come out and campaign for you would be this sort of point of excitement on the campaign trail. Like, they figured that out pretty early on. And so that celebrity endorser has been a staple of US politics for like 100 years now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think about it, for me, one of the most prominent ones, at least in the 20th century, is thinking about Jackie Robinson, because Richard Nixon is running against John F. Kennedy, and they are both booing. They are both trying to court his vote. Matter of fact, they set up meetings with him on the same day to try to, like, you know, persuade him. And basically, Jackie Robinson says he meets with Nixon, and he's like, yeah, this can't be great. Like, he felt like he was being patronized. But then when he met with JFK, he said it was even worse. Like, JFK wouldn't even look him in the eye. Like, JFK was like, black person? What's a black person? Like, he said it was so bad that he had never even contemplated, like, the black vote, that he was like, yeah, Nixon will get my vote, but only because he seemed like the lesser of two evils, or he seemed at least like he had more of a plan than Kennedy did. He later says he regrets that endorsement, but at the time, Jackie Robinson is like huge.
But were they courting him as a celebrity or as a political figure at that point?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both.
Right.
I mean, like, at the time, I can't think of in terms of like a celebrity athlete who would be bigger than Jackie Robinson. Maybe like Muhammad Ali, or, you know, like in terms of boxers, that was a really big deal about like which boxers would endorse. But
that was such a politicized time for sports that, you know, it's
Yes.
also Jackie Robinson. It's a civil rights figure as much as he is a celebrity and athlete. And so, you know, it's just an interesting.
It's a little bit
dynamic.
of both. It's the nostalgia of his sports, of his athletic career, but also him as a leading civil rights leader too.
And that's a moment when celebrity and politics are really getting mashed up. You've just had Eisenhower as president for 8 years, who really came to office as a celebrity. And obviously Kennedy had the kind of like TV angle and movie star looks and Camelot. So I do think that there is something about the blurring that's happening. Obviously, we live in a much blurrier time. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We're living a blurry time, and especially because I think politicians are now celebrities too. And so it's like, you know, when you look at, I mean, it's funnily enough, like you look at Oprah endorsing Obama. One way to look at that is like a celebrity taking a political stance, but the other is to look at it as like one celebrity sort of patting another celebrity on the back, because so much of Obama's campaign and, you know, was about kind of him rising to that level of sort of renown. I mean, you know, and obviously Trump like gets celebrity endorsements in part because they're just like the people who he's hung out with being a celebrity over the years. But, do we have thoughts on, I'm sure you have thoughts on Oprah, Kellie? Like, I mean, that's like the classic one. I think people forget that Oprah was fairly apolitical, and then maybe even I would argue, I think you argued, you know, like at least small C conservative, if not big C conservative.
For sure. She's talked about voting for Republicans before. I mean, she's always said she was an independent, but she's definitely talked about voting for Republicans. I'm not sure if she voted for Reagan or not. I don't want to put that out there if that's not true. But
she's like a rich person. And I think that's like the first way to sort of understand her. She's just wants like, what's going to help my money, you know?
Yes. And I think that totally tracks and makes sense. And it's really not until Obama that she says, not only is she going to publicly say who she's endorsing, but she's going to like stump for him as well. Which maybe not for Oprah's viewers, but for Oprah herself, that was a big deal. To sort of put herself, her Midas touch out on the political line, I think was something we had not seen before. You know, she endorsed a lot of big ideas and a lot of big other campaigns and things of that nature, but politics was sort of something she relatively avoided throughout her show. And so now, you know, it depends on how you see Oprah, but like most people, I would think of her as a liberal supporter. I don't think you could see Oprah voting or endorsing someone on the Republican ticket anytime.
Right. Though it is an interesting counter, you know, story, which is like if after Obama, you know, a Mitt Romney type becomes president, does Oprah sort of go back to being an independent? I mean, you know, the Trump era comes in.
Depends on who's on the other side. Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
But Niki, thoughts on Oprah or these other celebrity endorsements, whether they're notable, whether they matter?
It's fascinating. I mean, I do think they matter at a certain level because, again, as you were saying earlier, Jody, it just opens up paths for people to understand their political choices in more favorable ways. So if it's like, well, Oprah is for this, I like Oprah, this makes a lot of sense, or to actually help Swifties organizing, like doing more than just voting, but actually getting out there to help get out the vote and those kinds of
and getting people registered
activities.
Yeah, like 40. What is it? Taylor Swift gets like 40,000 people in the state of Tennessee registered to vote. Even if, regardless of who you're voting for, getting 40,000 people to register to vote is not nothing. I mean,
Right.
it's pretty persuasive.
And I think that it also speaks to some changes that have happened in political culture, because I think in the 80s and 90s, you could get away with presenting yourself as apolitical. And I don't know that there is the same kind of space for that. I think that fans and audiences have even stronger parasocial relations with the people who they follow. They get more of an intimate look at celebrities' interior lives, and they come to expect them to raise their voices about political issues. And there is still like a shut up and sing thing. So I don't want to discount it. But they also face a lot more pressure from their fans to come out and say something, because silence is understood as something negative, as an abdication of the power that they have. And so there's a pressure on celebrities to endorse or to at least kind of make their politics known. And, the stuff around Chapel Roan for not coming down firmly in one place, it caused a ton of blowback for her.
It's so funny. It's such a good thought, because it cuts counter to what I think is the effect of a Taylor Swift endorsement, which is mostly bringing new voters into the fold and just like that basic awareness. And when you look at the studies, like there is actually a sort of, I wouldn't call it robust literature, but decent literature that says new voters and just awareness and like, here's how you can register to vote, and you can watch the traffic flow to that. I think that's the main impact of a celebrity endorsement, and like a Liz Cheney endorsement isn't going to do that, right? But a Taylor Swift endorsement would do that. But that's very different from all the people who are pressuring a celebrity to take a political stance at the moment. Those people have made up their mind. And so it's weird that the pressure they're feeling and the effect that they have are kind of at cross currents or not actually related to each other, because the pressure they're feeling is from people who've already made up their mind, and the effect they have is for people who just hadn't really kind of engaged in that way.
But don't you think that genre matters a little bit too? Like I could, if Taylor Swift made this endorsement when she was still very much a country singer, I think as opposed to a pop singer, I feel like that has different.
Well, she did weigh in on that Senate race when I think she had a little bit more of that, like, and it was a local Tennessee race, and I think that did have a decent effect.
But I'm thinking about country artists. I'm thinking about hip hop artists. I'm thinking about like demographics or genres that we automatically tend to associate as being either liberal or conservative, and then how that has a impact across the board. Because there are a lot of conservative people that are Swifties, and same thing in the Democratic Party. I mean, there are a lot of people that listen to hip hop. So how you sort of think about those genres persuading people to operate outside of those expectations.
Well, that's where I think Jody's point about reaching people who may not be politically active is really important, because the people who already come in with pretty firm political identities probably aren't going to change them based on a celebrity endorsement. But one of the interesting strategies campaigns have been engaging in for a while, but in particular engaging in right now, is how do you reach the people who don't occupy political spaces? So this is like Barack Obama going on Between Two Ferns. This is, Donald Trump going on some of these like streamers and Twitchers podcasts.
Kamala Harris this week did All the Smoke, basketball podcast.
Yeah.
I think she's doing Call Her Daddy next week, I heard.
She is doing
No, I mean
she is. But I actually think that's the strategy, right? That's so important, because if you just keep going back to political spaces, you're going to be talking to the base and the same people over and over again. And rallies and things are important for activating that base and getting them to volunteer and do all that kind of important stuff. But it's when you enter into these other spaces that you have the opportunity, at least, to reach people who may not even know who the candidates are yet.
Yeah, that's true.
Totally. So look, we should wrap up here, but I think going back to what we talked about at the beginning, we will continue to talk about, given how close this election is, we've said it a million times on this show that when an election is this close, you can point to any of 50 reasons as the thing that tips it in one way and the other. And so I'm, over the course of this conversation, perfectly convinced that a celebrity endorsement or a cross-party endorsement could be the thing that could tip, or provide that path for people to walk in these last couple of weeks, as much as all of the sort of policy work and the campaigning and the get out the vote and then all of the kind of October surprise stuff. I mean, we didn't even, maybe next week we'll do this, but, I think the big obvious possible October surprise is whatever happens in the Middle East and, a deal there or a lack of a deal there or some other development feels like, gosh, we may just not realize that was the thing all along and, who knows. But anyway, all of these are possibilities. And so, I think it is worth stopping and looking at these various endorsements. And I'm sure both sides have a couple more of these stacked up and are being very careful about how to roll them out. And
how
so
strategic.
forth.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is another thing I want to do on one of these Sunday conversations is talk about the kind of media environments, which is related to this. But I think it's really fascinating. More than any election in my lifetime, it feels like the campaigns are just talking in different media environments. And it's really, really interesting. But let's get back to our weekends. Thanks to everyone for joining us. This was really fun. Do subscribe to the YouTube page or go back and watch this. If you were listening to this on the podcast and you want to see our faces, you can go back and watch this on the YouTube page. You can also go to our website, subscribe to our newsletter there where we're dropping some other stuff in there, some more thoughts about this year's election. We also have a merch store. I'm trying to plug these mugs. We don't have, next time we'll have one of them, but these pint glasses that we made are
They're
good.
nice.
I like them.
They're awesome.
I should have had mine.
I know. Mine's in the dishwasher.
Go check those out. But thank you everyone for joining us on the weekend. Let us know what you make of this and sort of this. If you have questions about this year's election, especially ones where we can bring a historical perspective, let us know. We'll be doing this every weekend. And then, of course, our regular programming on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And a lot of that is going to be kind of election-y as well, even though they're historical stories. It just feels like that time in these last few weeks.
That vibe.
But Nicole Hammer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Have a good weekend.
Bye, everyone.
Radiotopia.